Yeah, cool. All right, so we'll dive right in. So, like I said, today I want to dive into muscle tightness and fatigue. Why are things tighter? Why are things feeling so tired and old, right? What can we actually do to get our body back on track and hopefully rebuild that function, that athleticism that maybe we used to have, or maybe we want to get to now that we can, or if we want to reprioritize, right? So, the areas I want to cover today, this will break it down quite nicely, is I want to start with what are you wasting your time on currently that really doesn't do majority of what you think it does, right? What are you wasting your time on? And starting to give you a bit of insight into where I feel like it's more of a money-making game than actually anything that's particularly beneficial. The second one I want to go through is what makes a muscle tight. I want you to actually understand that, right? A big part of our coaching process as a whole is don't just do it because I told you to. Do it because it makes sense, because you really understand why. The next one I want to go through is what should you focus on instead, right? I want to obviously empower you with those adjustments to make to really help you move forward, okay? So we're going to dive into that there. And then we're going to dive into parasympathetic days. Now, this is something that we really push with our clients inside the program, and how vital these are to really move forward, right? Our clients are already working so hard. People that come into the program and want to get their body back on track, they're already working so hard. But what can you do on these parasympathetic days, or what most people call rest days, to be able to feel like we move forward? And then, like I said, if you can stick around to the end, I'd love to be able to offer you a free gift that will help you with this process, help you remove some of this tightness and really upgrade the way you exercise, the way you train. Hey, Joel, what's going on? You've got hips, lower back, hamstrings after playing tennis. Cool. Okay, hips, lower back. Cool, I'll dive into that one for sure. All right, so what I want to start with today is what are you wasting your time on? Okay, and these seem to be really, really prominent at the moment. You can spend upwards of $600–700 on these bloody massage balls. You've got the foam rollers, which are ever present around the world now. And then you've got stretching. Now, all three of these, I'm not saying they're bad. I'm not saying there's no use for them. I'm just saying there's way too much emphasis on what's going on here, right? So massage guns, or what do you want to call them, is supposedly this active recovery aspect, right? And if you're sitting on the couch and you're doing fuck all, it's just as useful as having those vibrator things under your legs, right? It's this whole, it's trying to improve circulation because you don't want to get off your butt. So it's not going to help with tightness. If muscles are tight, a massage ball or putting more pressure on it does not improve that movement, okay? So a foam roller, again, you've got to think of that proprioception of what if I stand on a nail and then I get off the nail, I feel better, okay? Like, I'm not going to feel better because I'm on the nail, but I'm going to feel better because I've released that pain. I'm away from that pain and I'm now repairing it. To be honest, a lot of what the foam roller does is the same thing. You're sitting on there in agony, like, ow, this thing really hurts. I get off it and I feel good now. Well, because you've just stopped doing the thing that caused the pain. And there is obviously, like, what the problem is here really is that your IT bands are the one that everybody are rolling out, right? And what you've got to realize is the IT band is a fascia, right? The whole purpose of a fascia is a protective connective tissue for everything else going on, right? So if you look into the research of what connective tissue does, and more importantly, the tensile strength of a fascia, you'll find that its tensile strength is as strong as steel. So if you've got some foam rolly ball with a couple knobs on it, it's certainly not going to improve that movement. If there's something out of alignment, there's some tightness going on, then you're not going to fix it here, no matter how much you grimace in your face and how much pain you're in. If you get off the thing, you feel better anyway, right? Save the time and don't put it in there in the first place. The third one I want to add in here is the stretching. And I've certainly got nothing against stretching, but I do pre-workout, okay? The reason, I'll go into exactly why in a second, but one of the biggest things here is if you actually look into the science that isn't biased towards people that are trying to sell a yoga program, you'll see that it is really, really vague. You'll notice that if you do it pre-training, there's a lot of conclusive evidence coming out that it's actually increasing the risk of any tears, strains, or injuries because you're relaxing muscles, okay? What you're telling your body to do is simply get better at at feeling that strain, feeling that pain in that range. You feel more comfortable at feeling that, and things start to relax, right? So that flexibility, passive flexibility without contraction, which I want to tell you there's a massive difference, is really going to cause quite a lot of issues with things if they get tight. Okay, if there is an injury come through, you'll see a lot of yoga instructors, and I've worked with a lot in the past, is you'll see a lot of yoga instructors really, really flexible, they look amazing, and they get one injury and everything breaks, right? Because they don't have that strength in that range. So while I think there's definitely a key importance to stretching at a time in the day that isn't pre-workout, you want to make sure you're really careful with how you place it. And it's not just constant stretching, because if you've got no stretch and no strength in that range, then you really run into issues, right? So I'm going to dive into that one a little bit more as well. So pre-training, I would recommend you don't add in the stretching, and then to be honest, save your money. Don't worry about a massage gun. You're going to get a lot more benefit out of just having a really relaxing massage therapist or acupuncture actually do the work properly. And then for God's sake, get rid of the foam roller. So I want to dive into a couple of things here and around, hey, Josh, Nicola, and Josh, great to have you on. Good. So what we want to dive into here around why a muscle's tight, right? What's the purpose? What's the reason for it being tight? And what you've got to realize, I'll bring the screen down for this, is that the muscle's not tight because it's just trying to be annoying. At the end of the day, the reason a muscle is tight, and the reason I put up that lady on the ice there, or the kid on the ice, I'll bring it back up rather than seeing me. What happens when you stand on ice, right? If you visualize and feel what that feels like, the first thing your body does is tighten up, right? If you stand on ice, it's like, shit, I'm going to tighten everything up. I'm going to protect everything, okay? So what you've got to start to understand when you look at this tightness, right? There's certain tightness through your shoulder, there's certain tightness through your hip, whatever that might be, then it's a lack of stability. It just as you stand on ice and your body's like, I'm going to keep everything tight, there's something that's not working. So if you've got that tightness coming through, so for example, who was it? Joel, yeah, so you're saying like your hips, your lower back, and your hamstrings, like these muscles are overactive, they're overworking. And what we find really, really common, especially like sort of middle-aged or older men, you'll notice your glutes are really not working like they used to, right? You're sitting on your bum all day, or you're in that position where you're not getting a huge amount of range through your hip, your glutes really don't work a lot, right? So when you're looking at these muscles, Joel, like your hips, your lower back, and your hamstrings, those are all the surrounding musculature of your hips, of that movement of hip extension. So if your glutes don't want to do the work, something has to do the work, right? So it's going to find some other muscle. And we've noticed this a lot, you know, working with a lot of contractors and a lot of construction level, and you're always working your back. You've got a rock solid back, it's made of steel, but your glutes are doing nothing. And this is why things start to fall apart. Okay, so a lot of that time, especially with men, it just seems to be more common, is the glutes really aren't firing. It's not always the glutes, but if you're noticing that lower back's not doing as much work, you're noticing the hamstrings, you're not going to sit there just stretching out your hamstring, right? The most common stretch is just stretching out your hamstring. But what you're doing is releasing that muscle and telling it to relax when it's the only thing doing the work, right? So when you start to realize that and just simply get rid of all of the things you think about tightness and simply bring it back to all the muscle does is contract. Okay, if the muscle's not contracting, then something else has to contract. So if your glutes aren't working through hip extension, then your back's now having to do that work. Right? So what we're looking for is these compensation patterns that are coming up. If something's underactive, and sure, it could be smaller muscles, right? We could be really looking into the little hip flexors in the hip. But if we're looking at the glutes and trying to make sure we can really contract these bigger muscles, then we can get back to proper function, okay? So if there's weakness through, I think someone mentioned the shoulder as well, right? This external rotation in the shoulder, we should be able to get fully vertical. Most people, by the time they get to 40, get to here, okay? And it's this lack of stability through your lats, through your lower traps, and all these muscles that should allow your scapula and your shoulder blades to rotate like this, right? But when we put a hand up above our head, everything just goes, and we feel like it's all locked up, right? It doesn't work properly. So if you can get those muscles contracting again, going through a proper row, which doesn't look like this, but actually wrapping down. A lot of our clients will know what I mean by that, like really looking at the quality of the movement, right? It's going to make such a big difference with your ability to access these ranges, okay? And I want to go through a couple of activations there as well. But my main purpose of today's conversation is really just trying to break this down and allow you to really simplify what's happening. If there's tightness, the next question should be what's weak, okay? It shouldn't be how can I release this muscle, okay? The really, really important part that I want to bring into account here is what we're looking at is the difference between full range of motion and active range, okay? So we're going to use a bench press as an example because this is a butt you can see. So if we're using a bench press, for example, your full range of motion is having your arms fully out and then going right down to say your chest, right? So you're seeing the bar, you're going from right up, straight arms to touching your chest, right? Most people would think that's full range of motion. But let's have a little look at real world. And, you know, I've got relatively long arms, so we'll use me as an example. Is if we're going through a bench press and I'm coming down and I'm trying to pull my shoulders back, and I get to here and I'm pulling my shoulders back, I've still got about 2-3 inches off my chest where I feel strong and stable. For me to go lower, I have to rotate or elevate my shoulders to get into that position, okay? So if you visualize that, and we can use examples for running, we can use examples for squats, all sorts of things, but with this, you can get the concept. Is if we come down and we go through that range, now that's the active range for my chest and for everything to be strong and for that muscle to do the work. And if I'm stabilizing with my back, then I won't get injured, no matter how heavy I go, no matter how hard I push that muscle. As long as nothing breaks, as long as nothing moves out of that form it should be, nothing gets injured, right? Where injury comes in is where those incorrect movements happen. So you start coming down and one shoulder starts lifting or an elbow starts flaring or whatever starts coming through, and that's where the injuries happen, okay? So when you start looking at that of where is my active range? Like personally for me, where is that active range? And this is why in our program, I'm really, really big on being like, it's not going to be Ollie's program, right? Just following a YouTube star online is not going to help you train. If we can show you those concepts of how you should move, what you should be feeling, what should you be focusing on, it really makes a big difference, because how Penelope moves compared to how Emma moves in the gym or how Joff compared to Nicola is going to be really, really different if we go through those movements in the gym, right? So we do this in our workshops, and we've had, you know, some guy who's 6'6" to someone who's 5, and you're going to see a massive difference in how they do a bench press or how they do a squat if they're effectively moving for them. And if you understand that movement, understand that range you should be working through, simply through asking that question without weight, right? I'm going to be able to come down, okay, that's my range for where I go in a bench press. If I'm doing a squat, right? I don't know if I can see it here, but if I bring my leg up and I'm going through that range, I want to make sure I can keep my back flat. As soon as I try to do this and try to get lower and my back starts rotating, I'm trying to go too far down, then that no longer becomes a leg exercise, right? My lower back's doing half the work. So if you're getting those injuries and aches and niggles come up, start to step back and question or ask, where are those movement, where am I breaking my form in those movements, right? Where am I getting maybe further than I am? Where am I losing simply control of the movement? Or am I focusing on the dumbbell or bar in my hands rather than what my body's actually doing, right? So if you bring that back to just simply, how can I get my body moving how it should? Is there any weird rotation or things moving around that's breaking my form? And this is likely my biggest ability to move forward and build function back, right? I set a, I hope that makes sense. If anyone's with me there, please put a thumbs up. It'd be great to see you watching. Hey, Morgan, great. Hey, Jacob and Gemini, awesome. So going through this understanding around training, we want to make sure that we're moving in through that active range, okay? If there's muscles that are under active, or if we go through a squat, we always feel dominant in our quads and we feel like our lower back tends to take over, two things we can do is simply make sure we're working through the range we should be actually moving through. So understanding how far to go. It's no longer just going ass to grass squats. It's not just bring the bar to your chest. It's how far should I actually move for my range? If I feel like I've got a bit of a niggly shoulder, or I feel like something's moving around, how can I strengthen and stabilize that, right? And that's going to be a big part of these activations and priming the body that I want to go through with you, all right? So if there's weaknesses, let's bring it back to some of these movements for people. So we'll go through Joel. So an example for you would be, let's look at obviously basic hip thrusts, making sure that you're not just moving through that range, you're able to contract that muscle. So through that, we're thrusting through and able to actually really feel the glutes working is going to allow you to get those back online so your lower back's not doing as much. But when you go into something like a squat, you've got to be now mindful of the range we go through. So if we go through that range, we're looking at coming right up till the leg comes up so our back's fully flat. Whereas as soon as we do this and then we rounded our back, I'm not actually getting any more flexion of my glute or my quad, right? There's no more movement for my legs. I'm simply getting lower through rounding my spine. It's not going to help that movement, all right? Graham, any tips around cartilage around the knee? Yeah, man. If you've got no cartilage in the knee, then it's not going to be so fun because you've got two bones on bone. But any sort of knee surgery and everything else, what I've noticed is two things. One, hamstrings don't tend to be strong enough. A lot of men are very quad dominant, or a lot of people are very quad dominant because the hamstrings aren't doing a lot. But if we're looking at improving knee range in general, a lot of these, I guess this brings it back to our main point is, rather than releasing muscles and having this obsession with constant release, the goal here is really looking at how can we strengthen, okay? So Graham, it is a little bit harder if there's no cartilage on the knee, then obviously that operation is certainly needed, but it sounds like you've already had the operation. So my goal here would be with control is getting you back to adding some strength in those ranges, right? And this is where doctors are good at doing what doctors do, but as soon as they start recommending nutrition or training practices, they really shit the bed because they don't understand it, right? So looking at getting you into a position of strengthening your muscle in that range, what can you currently actively get to, right? So we're not looking at passively stretching you into range beyond what you're strong, because now we're moving you into a position that you're weak and you're more likely to be injured. But if we can get you into a position where we can still contract that muscle, so going through a basic squat, I much prefer a hack squat with some bands, and we can go through a couple of rehab exercises there for you for sure, which allows you to start contracting and getting strong in those ranges, right? Rather than trying to release muscles, we've got to get your body strong. And this is where that shift is from that symptom to really the cause. What's that deeper issue, okay? I think that was everyone that was asking questions there. Yeah, man, cool. All right, so we'll go into the next one. So like I said, just to cover that main point is simply what is the main function of the muscle? If it's tight, what is the muscles that around it that may not be functioning at its best? If you start asking that question and simply start looking at how can I contract my lats better? How can I contract my chest muscles better? How can I simply work through the range that muscle is actually working? You're gonna be so much better off, and you're not gonna be wasting your time with so much active release and tightness and stretching, because the muscles are actually functioning properly, all right? So you get rid of this idea of functional movement, because you're actually thinking about proper function in the first place, that will actually stay there. You'll actually be able to move through those ranges. Was it not changing? Very cool. So like I said, what should you focus on? So I've kind of already dived into this already a little bit, but getting that awareness around, focus on fixing the cause, not simply the symptoms. So say the hamstring's tight or the chest is tight, but what's the actual cause of that, right? There's instability in those joints. So if that lower back's tight, the hamstring's tight, what muscles are underactive? What are they not working? You know, if we're doing a lot of running and we're working through a very short range of motion, we're going to get very tight in that range. We're going to get very locked up. If we're sitting down all day and we're never extending that hip, then we're going to get very locked up in that position. So best position there is how can we start extending that hip, that leg, that glute through more of its range to really get those muscles contracting and strong again, right? So regardless of whether your goal is simply being able to drop a bit of weight, or whether it's a case of really increasing your performance in running, cycling, whatever it is, you've still got to look outside of those particular disciplines in order to improve overall function of your body as a whole, all right? So the big one, like I said before there, focus on how you should move, right? It shouldn't be how Ollie moves or how someone on Instagram or YouTube looks. It's how should I understand what makes my body move the best, right? There's some vital cues we can look at. And if we simply shift the focus from what the bar's doing or what the YouTube star's doing to how should my body actually move? How does that feel good? What does that muscle actually feel like? If I contract my lat, what does that feel like, right? Because most people training their back are more focused on bringing their bar towards their chest than understanding what muscles are actually contracting in that range. If you simply ask yourself that question, you're already 10 times better off than simply putting more weight in the bar and working hard, right? You're keeping that focus there. Like I mentioned before, I did really get ahead of myself before, didn't I? The last one there is, the next one there was simply the active range. So not just going through a full range of motion and trying to go from A to B as fast or as extended as possible. We're trying to make sure what can I actively control and how can I get really strong inside that range, all right? And then like I said on that last point, what does that actually feel like? If I can't feel that muscle, how can I get things working? Okay, so two common weaknesses that we kind of already touched on here is simply lats. So the big muscle in our back here that tends to not work because we're so strong in our traps, our mid back, potentially our shoulders, that when we row, those are all the muscles that do the work, right? It's all up here. Whereas if we can really depress the shoulder blades, keep the chest up nice and tall, and row through that range and really understand what that muscle does, okay? If you don't know what that feels like, simple little cue here. If you've got your arm, put that by your side. So straight arm, we're gonna rotate your thumb down. And all I want you to do is, you can do this sitting down, is shove that into your hip. And you'll notice you probably wanna sit like this, where your shoulder's up really high, okay? If you can focus on driving that shoulder down towards your hip and shoving that hand in towards your hip, so drive down, drive in, and really wrap that shoulder back, you'll start to feel this muscle contract, right? And when you understand that that's as short as that muscle gets, like that's when the 2 points of the muscle is as close together as possible, then when we row, that should be as far as we go, right? If I've got relatively long arms, I'm still going to be, like I said, that 2 or 3 inches away from my body, okay? So this now makes it irrelevant to pull right through and wrap back like this, okay? So if you're getting this tightness or you're feeling really locked up through your upper back, regardless of whether you train often or not, I don't want to make this sound like it's an advanced technique, it's simply moving properly. Even if we're training once a week, this will make a huge difference to your ability to stabilize movements, right? So wrapping that down and pulling into that position allows you to focus on strengthening all the surrounding musculature, so it supports that position of being up, you know, good posture rather than this rotated, you know, tight up here, okay? So you're looking at what are those muscles that can really get you strong. The second one, as we mentioned before, hey Ash, hey Roger, good to have you on. Going through the hips, right? So rather than looking at my hamstrings are tight and I need to stretch this muscle out, what muscle is weak? What is underactive? What's not working? Is it because I'm sitting in a desk all day? Is it because I'm, you know, doing a lot of manual labor and I'm rounding all day? So is it my lower back overworking? Is it my hamstrings overworking? Is the muscles in the front, like my core and my hip flexors, underactive? They're not doing a huge amount. A lot of people think core is simply just the abs, right? But your obliques, your glutes are really, really crucial muscles in that stability of your core. Okay, so I'll keep coming back as a usual one is simply glutes, right? So making sure that we can actually get that contraction in the short range and make sure that hip extension like this actually happens, right? Because most people, and after 10 years plus of PT, noticing that when people bend, they bend with their knees or they round their back, actually being able to get back to a basic pivot is a really, really important skill of getting those glutes working again. Cool. All right, well, I hope that's helping everyone. I'm kind of going off a little tangent, but if any value, that would be great. So, right, I'll move on from here. Let's see what we got next. Cool. So what I had next for you, where was it? Here. So the next one here is, this really comes into it. And when we're talking about tightness and fatigue, obviously the one portion that we've focused on so far is simply that awareness of how we move in the gym, right? This whole quality versus quantity. But the next part that I really would be doing a disservice if I didn't touch into is simply this awareness of understanding stress, right? Because at the end of the day, 1 hour exercising is not going to fix the other 23 hours of the day. And as we go over every other week, how's that nutrition? Are we fueling the body and making sure the right nutrients is in the body? Obviously having high levels of inflammation from the foods we eat or foods we shouldn't be eating, lack of structure or poor sleep are really going to make a big difference to inflammation. If we have really chronic levels of inflammation in the body, which so many people do, then this is really going to cause a very high level of fatigue in the body as well. So that one is really, we've gone over that a lot in other weeks, but I did want to make sure I touched on that. The second one is obviously stress really has to be taken into consideration, and that has to be both physical and mental stress. So if we've had a really busy week, then we've got to adjust our training volume, right? Because even though it's supposedly a healthy stress, training is still a stress. So if we've had a really big week, you'll notice all the people that are really, high-strung, go-getter people at work are usually the guys running off to, lift some heavy weights or to do a spin class or something really high-stress activity. So they never really give their body a break. And then you start to notice things not responding, they start really shutting down, and you really be resisting that change. So some of the best things you could do is really make sure you manipulate the way you train to the way you work, or what that schedule really looks like. So if you're having one of those really big weeks, and hopefully it's not every week, but if you have a really big week, what can you do on those weeks to de-stress? Can we do a little bit more in the pool? Can we do a little bit more yoga that week? Not necessarily for the, the movement's one thing, but also the breathing and just slowing down and being a bit more conscious of our own body and movement, and actually actively working ourselves through range, okay? Whereas if we do have a bit more of a chilled out week, we actually feel like we're recovering and our sleep's on track, then yes, we can probably push it up a gear and start to really increase our training, right? There's got to be a bit of a dance with how much we can add in there, all right? So the next one here is, rather than looking at all these things we were going through before with your foam rollers and fluff, we want to make sure that active movement is still going to be one of the best things for recovery, right? So getting in that stretching, the best thing for it is simply more blood flow. It's not getting you more flexible, it's getting more blood flow. We're getting some movement, we're stretching out those muscles, we're getting into ranges. If we're being stuck in a seated position all day, how can we extend that hip with a basic hip flexor stretch or some glute hip thrusts or whatever to really get this blood flow, really make sure that we're improving how these muscles really work, okay? And then as I've kind of mentioned with the yoga and the these parasympathetic day in general, is the main three that we're looking for is simply breathing, really being consciously being able to get more diaphragmatic breathing, fully opening and expanding the rib cage, making sure that we are getting really deep, expansive breaths, because everybody breathes so shallowly, right? There's tons and tons we could go into there, and the amount that people breathe, it should be, we should be looking at 6 to 8, maybe up to 10 breaths a minute, and everybody's breathing at 20 plus. That means there's really low quality oxygen that we're actually getting to our brain and fueling our muscles, fueling our body. This massively impacts this stress component. Okay, so if you're not breathing properly, we could probably do a whole new one there as well, but making sure we can really look into deep nasal breathing, making sure that nose is working. I've told a lot of people to go get their nose fixed because, broken noses, being slogged in the face, rugby, whatever it is, and this nasal cavity is no longer working, and you're breathing through your mouth. You wonder why your concentration's got worse, your energy's got worse, you're getting this fatigue come through. That breathing is so important, okay? The second one is obviously simple movement. We come back to push play 30 minutes a day for everybody in New Zealand. It's so important, just looking at getting active movement every day. We're so sedentary, we're so stuck inside under artificial lights, not getting natural air and natural light exposure and that quality oxygen, that it's really affecting how our body functions as a whole, right? So if you can get more movement, it doesn't have to be in the gym, it doesn't have to be regimented. Simply getting out with your kids or your dog or out with a podcast, like that makes such a difference to just your overall health and will really allow you to clear out a bit more of this accumulation of inflammation and lactic acid and all these things that will be causing more issues there. Okay. Hey Zeke, hey Paul, good to have you on. And then the last one here, obviously that de-stress, right? We all know that stress is not something we're going to get away from, but simply being able to manage that at a certain level. I've been working with a lot of high performers, a lot of professionals, both in my coaching program and obviously surrounding myself with my own upskilling and coaching and learning. And one of these big things that is a massive trend with the people that I really respect, really just bringing things to a new level, is how much they prioritize rest, right? They perform it, and produce so much, but it's directly correlated with their ability to rest. And an area that I keep communicating with our clients is your ability to perform is directly correlated with your ability to rest. Okay, so if you're not taking that time to have a couple of low days, you're not having a time to really start to prioritize that sleep schedule and make sure you get to bed by 9:30, 10 o'clock, whatever it might be, rather than dragging it out night after night. That stuff adds up, right? And you're still trying to get the most out of your day, the most out of your exercise, the most out of your body. It's not going to happen. It's not going to continue serving you if you're not taking that time to de-stress and actually regenerate the body. Okay, cool. This is probably what we've been focusing on most week, but I hope that's really helped as well. All right, so if there's any other questions there I haven't covered, then please let me know. But the last thing I want to touch on today, as promised, as I said I would go through, is I want to make sure that I give you something to go away with. So if you want this cheat sheet, taking you through some of these activations, some basic movements on how you can get those muscles contracting, simply write cheat sheet, comment that below this video, and I'll reach out to you personally and give you access to this. I want to make sure that this really gives you some awareness to what can you add into your current training, into your daily routine to improve maybe some of this tightness, lack of movement, to make sure we're not just simply getting passive range and stretching muscles. We're looking at how we can get strong and we can actively control that range. It'll reduce injury, it'll improve function, it'll improve your overall movement, and making sure that you have this awareness of how your body works. Okay, so this cheat sheet will really help you build some of those key foundations that we'll do before each movement. All right, so one of the big ones here, like I mentioned, the big point of this call today, regardless of what sort of exercise you enjoy, there really has to be a base of resistance training, right? It doesn't have to be every day. Once, twice, maybe 3 times a week would be really, really great. If you're already doing a couple cycles a week, mountain bike rides, swims, whatever it is, then that's fantastic. It's movement, it's all this that we've just talked about. But there really has to be some form of resistance training. If longevity, if strength and overall athleticism is something that you value, you want to make sure that those muscles still work. You want to still make sure they function in all these ranges and they don't get slowly locked up and tighten. Okay. The next one is bring awareness to how you move, not how I move, not how someone else moves, but how you should move and what range you should really be working through. Okay. So it's bringing it down to this internal awareness of what your body's actually doing. What are you feeling? Ask those questions, right? You get better answers when you ask better questions. So what am I focusing on? Can I feel those muscles I'm actually training? Rather than just training harder, how can I get more quality out of each and every rep, each and every minute that I spend in the gym or my home gym or out on the running track, right? And then the last one, as I kind of covered, the big topic here is contract muscles. Don't just move weight, contract muscles. If you want to be strong, you want to be athletic, you want to keep being able to do the things you want to do without your body holding you back, there needs to be some focus on contracting muscles. Make sure there is some resistance training in your routine. If things are slowing down, this has to be your start. Okay, if you feel stuck in this area, you don't feel like you're clear on making the most of your time, or you're really stuck even where to start with resistance training, please reach out. I'd love to help you out there. If you want this cheat sheet, like I said, comment below cheat sheet, and I'd love to give you access to this as well. All right.